book as opposed to like another Fool's Errand, which is just focused on one war?
Sure. Well, actually, Fool's Errand started out as this book. And so chapter one was getting into this mess, and then chapter two is Afghanistan. And I just got bogged down in the Afghan quagmire, as has happened to so many before me. And it turned into a whole book. And so that's the real question. Why'd you write a book about Afghanistan? Because chapter two got out of control. That's why. Um, so then this is the book that I was supposed to have written in the first place. And there's kind of a cool story behind it, which is that Thaddeus Russell brought me on to Renegade University. Although, sorry, Thad, because I've not done my part there for what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm kind of spread too thin. But one of the things I did, there was a presentation on the war in Afghanistan once the book was done. But then I came and did another one on the war on terrorism a month later. So this was in February of 2018. And what happened was I took the outline of the book that I was going to write in the first place, of just the notes I had jotted down about what I want to cover and the wars in order and all that. And then it's Tom Wood's old producer, assistant guy who now works with Thad, AJ Von Slyke. I think it's Von, not Van. Sorry, AJ, if I said it wrong. I think it's AJ Von Slyke, and he's brilliant. So he took my just completely crummy outline and turned it into this beautiful PowerPoint presentation with all these great pictures, you know, and everything. And then I did this as a presentation for Thaddeus Russell's Renegade University, which, hey, Liam, you know me, kid. It took 5.5 hours to get through it all. And, you know, a few cans of Dr. Pepper, but we got it done, right? So then this wonderful woman, Joanne from Australia, she, believe it or not, sat and went through and transcribed the entire 5.5 hour presentation. And then, so this book is the extremely edited and added to transcript of a talk I gave based on the outline that I had written for the book in the first place. So it worked out. And the reason it took so long, though, was because once I started working on it, I got carried away. And especially on Iraq War II, it started turning into another Fool's Errand about Iraq War II. But the problem is so many books have been written about Iraq War II that have all this, you know, great detail in them. But I have a more narrow story to tell about that war rather than just getting into all the different aspects and everything. So, and I know that, you know, if I had just continued on the way I was, then I had to, you know, basically equal that level of detail with the rest of the wars, that the whole thing would have been 600 pages and it would take me 6 years and no one would ever read it. So I decided last summer to throw the whole thing out and start over again. I mean, with her transcript. And then I just went from there and tried to hammer it out as fast as I could. And so there's no footnotes, unlike Fool's Errand, which some people really got bogged down in the sort of PhD thesis kind of nature of the writing in Fool's Errand, which I don't know if that would have ever got me a degree or not, but it's certainly full of footnotes and extreme levels of detail in a way that some people found too difficult. Well, this one is supposed to be much easier, you know, a much more kind of brief and readable take, not just for you and the people in the libertarian movement and the anti-war movement, but hopefully for your people too, to be able like, hey, Uncle Bob, you know what? This is that guy I was telling you about. Just check this out. Now, I wanted it, Liam, I really wanted it to be just 150 pages so that you could say, Uncle Bob, look, it's just 150 pages. Now, yeah, sorry, you're going to have to tell him it is 3. But he'll love it, though. He'll love it. And you know, because I'm a libertarian, that means I'm absolutely not partisan. And so even if you like some presidents and dislike others, you got to recognize that I treat them fairly. I dislike all of them, but I don't, you know, like personally, on a personal level, I hate Bill Clinton and George W. Bush the most, right? Again, I'm not a partisan. Those two are the ones I really hate the most. But in terms of the way I write about them, you know, they're all equal. I'm not trying to pull any punches or any favor or anything like that. It's just the story of what it was that they did and how each war led to the next and how the whole thing's stupid and never should have been. And so far the reception is pretty good. People seem to, you know, think that I got away with cramming it all in there, what I was trying to say in 300 pages. So I
Yeah.
guess I'll ask you if you think I got away with it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it so far. I haven't made it all the way through, but it's #1 in War and Peace right now, right?
Yeah. Since
Wow.
the first day. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do want to read for people like Uncle Bob. I want to read this little part that I
Okay.
highlighted in the book. It says the problem is that our government is ignoring and misrepresenting the real causes of the terrorist war against the United States. So for Uncle Bob, those people out there that read the title, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, and they hear like, well, aren't terrorists bad? Like, what would you say to those people who, might have been indoctrinated or something like that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the false premise of the whole war is that they started it, but the truth is that's not true. It's our government that started it. And so that doesn't mean that they're the good guys and that our country are the bad guys, and it doesn't obviously justify targeted violence against American civilians, which, nobody would argue about whether September 11th is an atrocity or not. That's not the question. The question is just, what was the true motive? And George W. Bush was lying, and he knew he was lying when he said they hate us because of our goodness. They hate us because we're free. They hate us because of democracy and voting and freedom of religion. Well, that's just crazy. I mean, think about, on the latter point, which is probably the most important point in all of world history, freedom of religion. In the United States of America, there are roughly 3 million Muslims who are perfectly free to worship exactly as they wish without interference from anyone. And there have been a total of 0 anti-Muslim pogroms in this country ever. Right? I mean, there have been hate crimes. There's the guy shot up a mosque of Sikhs, right? That's not even a mosque, a Sikh temple. They're not even Muslim. Um, there have been one-offs, but there's never been an organized, riot against Muslims ever in the land between Canada and Mexico. It's never happened. And in my county, Williamson County, north of Austin, we're a little bit country and a little bit Republican leaning as opposed to Austin, Texas. But you drive right down the street and there's a mosque and a Methodist church and a Baptist church and a Catholic church and a Jewish synagogue, all within a mile of each other, and nobody cares. And nobody's enemies. We're all friends and we're all neighbors because we just don't care about that, dude. What we care about is that you have the right, Liam, to believe whatever you want, son. That's what we believe in America. That's first, right? And so the idea that the Muslim extremists like Osama bin Laden, what he really hated about us was our tolerance for Muslims in our midst in this super duper majority Christian society that and obviously with a Jewish minority that has a lot of influence in
Mhm.
terms of American policy and politics. And we don't persecute Muslims. We don't go after Muslims. But that's why they hate us, because we don't? Come on.
Right.
At this point, George W. Bush is just jerking your chain. And especially now that it's 20 years later, Uncle Bob ought to be able to fess up. You
Yeah.
know what? Uncle Bob knows. In fact, I was there. We were at the theater together in the same room and saw Rambo 3 together. And it was about how Ronald Reagan heroically supported the freedom fighters of Afghanistan resisting the Soviet occupation of that country in the 1980s. And Uncle Bob knows that wasn't just the Afghan Mujahideen. That was the Arab Afghans from all across the Middle East that were recruited by the CIA and sent there, with the help of the Saudis and the Pakistanis to wage that war. Everybody knows that. Okay? Then people just want to act like the 1990s never happened. Next thing you know, our towers come down and we don't deserve an explanation. Well, okay. The explanation is that Ronald Reagan's vice president, H.W. Bush, decided to go to war against Saddam Hussein in 91 and decided to leave American troops, American combat forces, and especially airmen and air bases in Saudi Arabia in order to wage the permanent blockade and no-fly zone campaign against Iraq. And that was what motivated Ronald Reagan's heroic freedom fighters into turning into evil terrorists and targeting the United States instead of America's enemies. That was what it was. And so, of course, George W. Bush couldn't admit that any of this was true because his father was up to his eyeballs in it, right? My father and Ronald Reagan and my father backed these men. And my father really pissed them off by putting troops next to their most holy territory. And
Hmm.
then my virtual stepbrother, Bill Clinton, who golfs with Senior all the time and is, ever since defeating Senior, was essentially adopted as a stepbrother into the Bush family. Hey, they all sold cocaine together in the 1980s anyway, right? So what difference does it make? And so it's not like George W. Bush could. If you held a gun to his head, he couldn't admit that this is all my father and my stepbrother's fault, could he? Right? So instead, he said, they hate us because we're innocent. They
Right.
hate us because history began today. And the more we love Jesus and the more we love our mothers and our sisters, the more they want to kill us. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Come on. The reality was America, well, and just put the shoe on the other foot. It's easy. What if the Saudis had military bases in our country, even at the invitation of our governors? Say Governor Abbott invited the Saudis to come and build military bases in San Antonio, and then you next to the Alamo, say, and then use those military bases in order to launch sorties to bomb Mexico for 10 years. What would the Texicans do about that? Right? We would shoot them to death if we
Yeah.
would do whatever it took to get rid of them. And then I'm sorry I'm redundant for my consumers of my interviews, but it seems like the point to make, right? That you look at how jealous Texans are of the Alamo and San Antonio, how much that means to us, and what we would do to keep that out of the hands of any foreign occupying army anytime in the next 1,000 years. Nobody better ever try it, right? But now think about it like this, Liam. What if Jesus had been born at the Alamo in San Antonio back 2,000 years ago as a very origin and basis of the Christian religion, which is, again, believed by the supermajority of the population of the United States? How much more important would the Alamo and San Antonio be to the people of this state and this land then? Okay,
Well,
that's what
I
we're
know
talking
people
about.
from Montana would go down to
That's
Texas.
right. That's right. And look what happens when somebody attacks our towers in New York who have no sacred meaning at all. They're just office buildings full of civilians. If they had any symbolic meaning, it was the power of the Rockefeller family, Nelson and David. But so that's not America's, anything. I mean, a little bit of our pride. It was just the civilian casualties, right? It wasn't a holy site. It's Wall Street down there, the financial district. It's important. But then what do you have? You have American Christians and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims from all 50 states rush to go and join the army to defend their country against foreign attack. Well, come on, that's how it works on the other side too. It's just as simple as that. It's just as simple as that. And take the story of Mohammed Atta, who was the lead hijacker on September 11th. He and his friends, their primary motive was American support for Israel. And not for Israel just being a nice Jewish boy minding its own business and trying to get along over there, but Israel's crimes against the civilian population of Palestine and of Lebanon. And there's a great book called Perfect Soldiers by Terry McDermott, which is the biography of Mohammed Atta and all of his buddies at the Hamburg cell. Ramzi bin al-Shibh, who helped coordinate the attack, and Marwan al-Shehi and these other guys who served as the pilots. And these were the ringleaders, not Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon. That was the San Diego cell. But these were the guys that flew the other three planes on September 11th, okay? And their motive was Israel and Lebanon. And here's the anecdote. You can find it from 10 sources. It's true, okay? From his own family, tells the story and everything. When Shimon Peres launched Operation Grapes of Wrath against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon in 1996, Mohammed Atta filled out his last will and testament, which was essentially him joining the army, right? That was him saying, whatever happens, I'll give my life for this cause to fight as a soldier in this war against these aggressors. That was his point of view on the thing. And then it was just a couple of days after that, and that's how we know it's true. We even know the day that this happened, that he filled out the will and everything. It was, I think, 2 days later that the Qana massacre, the first Qana massacre, happened in 1996, where the Israelis killed, pretty sure it was 106 or 108 civilians hiding in a United Nations shelter, women and children hiding in a UN shelter. And the Israelis shelled it and killed them all. And It was just a couple of months later that bin Laden arrived in Afghanistan and issued his declaration of war against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy places. That's what it was called. Pretty subtle, huh? And then, but about one third of it, it's about the bases in Saudi, but then about one third of it is his case against American support for Israel and their war crimes in Lebanon. And he goes on and on about Kana. And he is explicit. We will never forget the images of the children's heads and arms severed from their bodies. He says, how come you think that your blood is blood, but our blood is water? That might have been a different interview, but it was in reference to the same atrocity. And he essentially says, we'll show you. So then what happened, Liam, was that Mohammed Atta read bin Laden's rant and said, this is my guy, right? So this is why the Hamburg cell, who were so angry at Israel, this is how and why they joined Al-Qaeda, because they read bin Laden's declaration of war that said that he was angry about the exact same things that they were angry about. And so that was when they decided, we're joining with this guy. In the beginning of 97, they traveled to Afghanistan. They met bin Laden where they were recruited right in. You guys got German passports, you say? All right, we can make something out of this. Consider yourselves recruited. Ever been to flight school? And these are engineering students, right? And, by the way, this is a small parenthesis, but I guess it's worth bringing up. A lot of the reason that people became 9/11 truthers after 9/11, it wasn't just because Bush said they hate us for our freedom, and that didn't make any sense. It was because Bush said that the Taliban did it. Right. And that didn't make any sense because people thought, what, a bunch of cavemen pulled off this sophisticated operation in the West like this? The Taliban are more hillbilly than anybody in Appalachia. Okay, these guys are from the backwoods. How could they have done it? Well, they didn't. Okay, it wasn't the Taliban. It was Al-Qaeda. And our government tried very hard to conflate those things together. They succeeded in fooling your Uncle Bob into not being able to tell the difference between the two. But in fact, bin Laden was the son of a billionaire and had a degree in engineering. His partner Zawahiri was one of the most prominent surgeons in Cairo, Egypt. Okay, the guys, again, the cell of the Hamburg cell of Al-Qaeda September 11th hijackers, they were engineering students studying in Germany. Okay, these were not cavemen. These were sophisticated men. And that was how they were able to pull off that attack. And that was something that, because of our government's various lies about it, they sure built a straw man case that a truther can knock down. But the real steelman case for Al-Qaeda did it remains. If you look for good journalism and don't just ask the government for their own little commission report and that kind of thing, you find your own bits and pieces where you can, and you'll see who it was that did it. And it was Al-Qaeda that did it. And after all, the government knew that an attack was coming all summer long. They just, minimal Occam's razor case. They just couldn't get their act together to prevent it in time. Okay. Yeah. People can say that they turned a deliberate blind eye. That's essentially unprovable, right? And not falsifiable. But I don't think that there's any question that bin Laden and his group were behind the attack. And I think that was part of the reason why people didn't buy that, because they were saying, come on, these guys from the far side of the town of Bedrock came and knocked down the biggest two towers in Manhattan. That doesn't sound right, but that wasn't really right. It was Al-Qaeda that did it, not the Taliban. And that's a whole other subject, I guess, but go ahead.
Yeah, and this wasn't their first attack, right? Like, they found a laptop full of information.